That was a sentence that slid across the line that morning. Flat, businesslike, as if he were confirming a lunch reservation. The voice didn't shout. It didn't need to. It pressed in around the room the way dust hangs in a beam of light. Inescapable once you notice it. I was standing in my studio, palms still tacky with varnish, staring at the bones of a building older than my father's memories. The iron-pillared hall of the old halcyon textile works lay around me, sun-striped through cracked clear-story windows, 100 years of stories embedded in timber and brick. I had spent 2 years coaxing it back to life. I knew every nail head, every notch in the joist, every stubborn brick that refused to seat properly until I warmed it in my hands. "My name's Ryan Malik," I said to the empty room when the line went dead, more to ground myself than to introduce anything. If you'd asked the Ryan from 3 years ago what could possibly go sideways about buying a retired factory no one wanted and turning it into a public art space, I would have laughed. Who complains when you fix what's rotting? Who objects when a dead district gets a pulse? I learned the answer fast. People who see your walls as numbers on a spreadsheet and your history as a rounding error. This mill wasn't just steel and stone to me. My maternal grandfather had worked here when he came over with a suitcase and an accent that made people lean in. He ran looms until his hearing went fuzzy and the threads bit grooves into his fingers. The day I signed the deed, I ran my hands along the scarred cutting tables and found a little Zedum he had carved under the lip in a hurry, as if leaving a breadcrumb for later. When I stripped the paint from the loading doors, a smear of blue dye bled out of the wood, and, God help me, I could smell laundry soap and machine oil, like the air itself had been waiting for someone to notice. We were almost ready. The floorboards were sealed. The roof was my pride, resheathed with reclaimed tin that sang in the rain instead of leaking. We'd built a gallery wall from pallet wood and hung it like a promise. I had the inaugural exhibit booked, photographs of industrial hands. I was tightening a hinge when the knock came. Not a polite tap, not the neighborly, "You got a minute?" This was a knock that commandeered your time. A man in a crisp municipal windbreaker stood there, cap low, one thumb hooked in his back pocket. In his other hand was a red-bordered envelope. "Mr. Malik," he said in that steady, not friendly tone bureaucrats practice in mirrors. "Stop work order. Emergency hazard determination. Impact mitigation balanced you." I laughed without meaning to. It sounded like someone else's laugh. Thin, bewildered. Has it? We've had 3 independent safety inspections. There's nothing. "Not my call," he said, as if we were talking about the weather. "New assessment supersedes prior evaluations." He gave me a carbon copied form thick enough to use as a coaster and a business card for the Metropolitan Redevelopment Consortium, an entity I had only ever seen at ribbon cuttings in the paper. 7 days to remit, or we proceed with abatement. Abatement is a word you don't feel until you picture the machine that performs it. "I'm just a courier," he added, almost apologetic. "Good luck." The municipal SUV crunched down the lane and sucked a contrail of dust behind it, and suddenly the whole felt louder. Every drip, every groan of settling timber. I set the packet on a sawhorse and read. The seal was glossy, too glossy, the way novelty stationery glows when it pretends to be official. The signature below the typed name looped in a way I've never seen a civil engineer's hand loop. The fee, $59,400, was printed twice, once in numbers, once in words, as if daring me to miss it. And right under that, bold enough to leave an afterimage when I blinked, "Failure to comply authorizes immediate demolition to protect the public." I called the number on the card. A woman picked up after half a ring, voice smooth like she'd sanded the edges off every syllable. "Mr. Malik," she said warmly, "this is Cassandra Vale, Executive Director of the Consortium. I understand you received our notice this morning. I wanted to personally provide clarity." Clarity, I repeated, because if I didn't echo the word, I might say another one. Your organization doesn't own this property, and this site is under a preservation overlay. No one at City Planning has raised what you're raising. The overlay's perimeter has been rationalized, she said, as if explaining geometry to a distracted student. No one's trying to harm your project. We're aligning infrastructure with current realities. Older structures impose hidden costs. Emergency access, drainage load, fire response. We apply a modest fee to ensure you aren't inadvertently straining shared systems. We aren't connected to a single shared system, I said. We upgraded the system, installed our own filtration, rewired everything to code. We don't even tie into the city's storm lines. What exactly am I straining? There was a pause, surgical in length, before she replied. The important thing is to resolve this collaboratively. I'd hate to see a cultural asset hampered by procedural issues. Procedural issues, said like a silk scarf laid over a snare. When the call ended, I ran my thumb over the ZM notch beneath the table, a habit I had picked up unconsciously. One of us had to stay steady. I gave myself the same deadline they gave me, 7 days to understand what machine I was wedged inside of. The next morning I walked into the City Records Annex, a building that smells like hot dust and photocopier toner, and asked the clerk about the Halcyon District overlay and any recent rationalizations. She was mid-stamp and paused in the air, looked up at me, and did something I didn't expect. She shut the stamp pad gently, like putting a lid on a pot. "You're not the first," she said softly. "Something's wrong with their maps." She returned with 2 binders, one that looked like it had been gnawed on by time, and the other glossier than a brochure. The original overlay map, stamped, dated, initialed, clearly encircled the mill and left it under preservation. The new map, same title, same code, bulged like a greedy stomach. The overlay ended a block shy of my lot. In its place, a redevelopment priority zone had bloomed. How does that happen without a public hearing? I asked. They filed them as administrative updates, she said, apology and anger braided in her voice. If you don't know where to look, it looks clean, but the archives don't forget. I scanned everything. I scanned like a student the night before finals, like a man building a raft from whatever he can find before the water rises. On my way out, the clerk slid a handwritten note across the counter. Try the bungalow on Whitman Street. Ask for Elena. Elena Reyes had retired from city planning the year I bought the mill. Her front porch was a jungle of potted herbs and old city plaques that should have been in a museum. When I explained what I had, she disappeared into a back room and returned with a flat metal box and a face I recognized in my bones, the face of someone who has been waiting for the knock that proves their doubt was not paranoia. I worried this would come, she said. 5 years ago, Ms. Vale visited me, asked me to modernize our overlays, her word, by digitizing them. She was eager, flattering, and specific about which perimeters were outdated. I moved some lines because she brought corrections that looked official. It ate at me later. She opened the box. Inside were maps drawn by her late partner, a field surveyor who'd walked the boundaries back when boundaries were measured by boots and tape. His pen lines were precise, and his notes were crusted with the kind of detail an algorithm never sees. Your mill, she said, tapping the vellum with a fingernail, sits squarely inside the overlay. Always has. I'll swear to it. Would you testify? I asked before I could talk myself out of needing her that much. She straightened. I didn't retire to watch people rewrite the ground beneath us. That night, headlights fogged across my studio windows and snagged on the suspended dust. I stepped out into the moist dark, and a man in his 40s climbed from a hatchback, coat soaked through, a satchel hugged to his chest. You Ryan? He asked. Name's Daniel Cho. I did contract work for the consortium. I shouldn't be here. Then why are you? I asked. Guilt, he said, a tired smile ghosting across his mouth. He pulled a tablet wrapped in plastic from the satchel and opened a project folder. Structural assessments, drainage analyses, load calculations. These are the real reports, he said. What you've been shown, the ones that say your roof is a hazard, your foundations are a sponge, your drains load the city's line. That's edited. Vale's team takes our raw assessments and massages the conclusions. They overlay algorithmic risk factors until the model says what the fee schedule needs it to say. I flipped through side-by-side charts, identical inputs, different outputs. The risk-adjusted hazard index spiked in consortium version like a heart monitor wired to fear. Why help me? I asked. Because I built the tools she's using to steal, he said, and I want to unbuild them. Between Elena's maps and Daniel's data, I had kindling. I needed a match. Elena connected me to a litigator named Sarah Karishi, who had spent the last 2 years quietly assembling affidavits from business owners who had paid mitigation fees to the consortium under threat of abatement. She had been missing what we had, proof that the line drawing and number bending weren't just sloppy, they were deliberate. When I showed her the packet, she didn't grin. She exhaled, like someone setting down something heavy. "We take this to the Planning Commission," she said, "and if they don't listen, we take it further. Fraud merit process is still fraud." I didn't have long to savor the feeling of a plan. Cassandra came to me before I came to her. A silver sedan slid to a stop by the loading dock the next afternoon and disgorged Cassandra in a coat that probably cost what I had left in my savings. A young man climbed out of the passenger side, clutching a laptop like a shield. "Mr. Malik," she said, the kind of smile that photographs well. "I wanted to offer an amicable resolution. The consortium is prepared to reduce your fee to $40,000 if you pay by tomorrow." "Generous," I said. "I'm still unclear what system I'm burdening." "Our authority is broader than you may realize," she replied, stepping aside to display the young man. "This is Trevor, our data modeler. He has prepared a digital impact assessment." Trevor turned the screen. Graphs, logos, the kind of slickness that intimidates jurors. "Your assessed value is above the district median by a factor of 1.6, he said. "That disparity intensifies fire response routing, crowd storm routing, and distorts equalized tax flows. We quantify that into an infrastructure burden coefficient." I leaned closer and watched the little notation at the bottom of the screen flash. Generated 2143. The city servers didn't push updates after 6. Public records update after hours now. I asked lightly. Trevor blinked. Cassandra stepped between us with the speed of someone who never lets underlings talk themselves into a subpoena. "What matters," she said, smile unmoved, "is solving this without spectacle." They left before I could tell her that spectacle was exactly what I planned. That night Daniel brought new printouts, pulled from the actual city database. Trevor's firm had been paid to alter the weighting in the blight risk model that several counties had licensed from a third party. Increase the coefficient here, nudge the baseline there, and old buildings turned into liabilities on paper. Under those numbers, the consortium levied fees nobody could afford, then kindly offered to assist with transition by buying properties at a discount. Elena, who had thought she was cleaning, had been used to move the fence posts first. Word spread that the consortium had applied to rationalize the overlay again, annexing 15 more lots. A hearing was set for Thursday. It would be a show. Fine. I knew how to stage things. The courthouse lawn looked like a festival on the morning of the hearing. Tripods and mics and clusters of citizens wearing jackets they usually reserve for funerals. Inside, the chamber hummed. On one side, Cassandra, Trevor, and 3 attorneys in coordinated suits. On the other, me, Syra, Elena, and Daniel, 4 people who had spent the last 72 hours sleeping badly and making copies. The chair banged her gavel once. Cassandra went first. "Madam Chair, members," she began, voice tuned to the exact frequency that reads as credible on evening news. "The consortium has, for years, been a model of sustainable redevelopment. Our work revives neglected districts, aligns heritage with safety, and leverages private capital to reduce strain on public budgets." Her slides were immaculate. Rising lines, glossy testimonials, stock images of smiling families beside cleaned-up brick corridors. At one point, she put my mill on screen and called it a managed transition success. I watched members of the commission nod along, pens gliding, ready to believe because believing meant they wouldn't have to admit they'd been asleep at the wheel. Trevor took the lectern and spoke in unassailable jargon. "Isolated legacy structures intensify response redundancy and induce nonlinear cost curves," he said. The line chart obeyed like a well-trained pet. Syra didn't clear her throat when she stood. She didn't raise her voice. She put Elena's map on the screen, a photograph of vellum and ink so steady it was beautiful. "These," she said, "are the true boundaries of the Halcyon overlay. They were never lawfully amended. The administrative updates the consortium submitted are not corrections. They are fabrications, and they came without notice to the public, without the oversight required by our code." She turned and clicked. Daniel's comparative charts took the wall. Same inputs, two outputs. A child could have seen the manipulation. Hey, Syra said, tapping the legend. An algorithmic weight applied by a consultant shifts a structure from safe to hazardous without a single change on the ground. That risk then justifies mitigation fees and, when unpaid, demolition. This isn't governance. It is a machine designed to convert history into cash. Elena, all 81 years of her, walked with a cane to the microphone and swore under oath. I signed updates believing they were digitizations of existing lines, she said, voice steady, eyes on Cassandra. I was misled. I have the original field notes. I have the photographs. I have the sealed approvals. If the consortium's version is true, then my life's work is a lie. It isn't. You could feel the room pivot, a ship leaning as cargo shifts. For the first time, Cassandra's smile did something human. It tightened. The chair asked Trevor, did you alter the risk model weights of the consortium's requests? For community benefit, he said, which was not the question. The chair asked again. He swallowed. Yes. When the gavel fell, it sounded less like order and more like a starter pistol. Reporters rushed the hall. Cassandra brushed past me in the aisle, perfume sugary and sharp, jaw locked enough to hum. You have no idea how many people profit from your little crusade, she hissed without turning her head. Now they'll have to do it in sunlight, I said. 10 days later. They always choose 10 days, as if enough time to launder a narrative. The commission voted. Unanimous. Every rationalization the consortium had filed in 5 years was void. The matter was referred to the Attorney General. It was not a victory dance. It was a quiet sound a knot makes when it comes loose. Syra called that afternoon. She didn't whoop. She had the voice of someone who knows the appeal is already being drafted. We're not done, she said, but today was honest. What followed felt like living inside someone else's newsfeed. Investigators in windbreakers with 3-letter acronyms in block print. Trevor's office boxed. A warrant served at a consortium's glass building where they used to host luncheons about innovation corridors. Cassandra's photo, a mugshot where the lighting was not her ally, ran above a list of charges that sounded ridiculous until you thought of the machine they built. Fraud, racketeering, false statements, interference with public administration. When other counties looked at their overlays, they found Cassandra's tidy rationalizations printed on their records, too. The conspiracy had a shape now. It was bigger than my street. The courts dissolved the Metropolitan Redevelopment Consortium. The restitution figure made headlines not because of the number, $1.3 million, but because of the way it was allocated, line items to owners who had paid fees under threat. When the check came to me, $59,400, the exact sum they demanded, I laughed in a way that finally sounded like me. The irony felt too on the nose to be real, but I cashed it and used it to pay the electricians, the roofers, the man with a forklift who had trusted me when I had only IOUs and a promise. The Heritage Board designated the mill as a protected cultural site. We mounted a bronze plaque beside the loading door. Halcyon Works, 1901. Registered site. People came by to take pictures and tilt their heads and squint into the high windows. A local paper called it the mill that said no. I didn't care about the headline. What made me stand on the loading dock an extra minute after closing was the sound the place made at dusk, the metal settling, the breath of a space that remembers being useful. 6 months later, the state legislature, the same body that had smiled at Cassandra's ribbon cuttings, voted for reforms that should have existed all along. Public hearing for any boundary change, no exceptions. Independent third-party verification for risk model alterations. Digitization with audit trails that couldn't be massaged by consultants whose invoices depended on higher coefficients. On the day it passed, a representative read the title of our case into the record. They didn't say my name. They said Halcyon. That was better. A year after the threat that started it, I sat on the steps inside the gallery, coffee warming my palms, staring at a plaque that caught the afternoon light. Elena sat beside me. The ache in her hip had gotten worse, but her eyes were brighter. My partner used to say, she murmured, that maps don't describe power, they distribute it. Draw a line wrong, and you move the world a little for someone who can't move it back. We watched shadows climb the brick the way tide water climbs rock. The air smelled like sawdust and cold iron, and something else I'd only ever smelled here, like wet thread warmed by light. Funny thing about rebuilding, you think you're restoring material, and then you realize you've been restoring your appetite for famous. I bought a building and ended up filing motions. I hung lights and learned to read a risk model like an MRI. I peeled paint and found underneath it the certainty that a tool can be used to harvest or to steal, and the difference isn't in the tool, it's in the hand. I don't romanticize what happened. We were lucky. We were prepared. We had Elena's maps and Daniel's conscience and Cyrus' stubbornness. We also had a city clerk who paused a stamp and decided to speak. Not everyone gets that cocktail of help at the moment they need it. There are mills that went down before we got here. There are families who mailed a check because they couldn't bear to see a bulldozer lined up on YouTube like a halftime show. I keep the red-bordered envelope in a drawer, not as a trophy but as a warning. Every machine has a seam. If you can find the seam, you can open it. On opening day, we held the exhibit I had planned a year before, close-up portraits of hands, scarred knuckles, dye-stained palms, a ring with a missing stone, a fingernail pressed flat by a machine once, long ago. People stood before the photos and cried without wiping their faces because the room felt safe enough to cry in. Near closing, a boy ran his finger along the ZM notch under the table where his mother's print hung. "What's this?" he asked, and I told him. His mother smiled, eyes wet. "He used to hide peppermints in his pocket," she said. "He'd pass them to the kids when the whistle blew." She laughed. "He told us the mill breathed if you waited quietly. He said you could hear it fall asleep." We waited. The building did what old buildings do when the world finally gives them permission. It sighed. So, do I call what happened justice? Luck? Proof that sometimes truth, with the right company, outlasts the lies built to outpace it? You tell me, if you've ever had to stand in the doorway and say, "No, not this one." If you've ever run your fingers over a mark left by someone you loved and realized that the mark is the only inheritance that matters, then you already know the answer I carry. They sent a courier with a stop work order. They sent a consultant with charts and a smile. They sent a voice that tried to sound like policy whispering a threat dressed as a courtesy. They didn't count on a retired planner with a box of maps, an engineer who wanted to be able to look at himself in a mirror, a lawyer who refused to be bored, a clerk who knew that sometimes the right thing to do is the risky thing. They didn't count on how stubborn a person can be when the thing at stake isn't just a roof and some bricks, but the proof that work and memory can be welded. If you had to push back against people who mistake your silence for permission, if you stared down a polished lie and felt your spine remember itself, drop your story below. Tell me if you think what we won was justice, or a lucky break, or something heavier, the reminder that maps can be redrawn, but the line that guards the truth doesn't move just because someone wants to land on the other side.